Now, most people's idea of landscape photography are the huge vistas, the nice expansive landscapes and the wonderful colours in the sky at sunrise and sunset. But let's face it, that's not always the case. You're not always in a beautiful location and you don't always have that wonderful colour in the sky. So today let's talk about adding some foreground objects and foreground interest into your shots. Not only will that help when you get those stunning views, but it'll also help when everything's a bit more dull, a bit more flat, and that'll really help elevate your image. So let's go on and explore through the Peak District and see what we can get. Now, I've got my wide angle lens on here, so this is a 14 to 30 millimeters, at about 20 mil or so. And what that's doing is it's just exaggerating this rock. So we've brought that rock really close to the camera, and that makes that a lot larger in the frame than it would be had we been a bit further back using a longer lens, where that would be a little bit insignificant and a bit pointless adding it as your foregrounds. Then draws your eye through. We've sort of connected all these elements because they're all this grey rock colour. So it draws your eye into the edge of the cliff top, and that then runs all the way along, takes your eye out to the background with the mountains in the back with that nice golden sky in the background, which is now looking absolutely wonderful. A couple of things to know with a wide angle lens is you'll get distortion. So especially in the corners, you want to make sure that there's nothing that would be easily identified as sort of a straight edge, something like a horizon maybe, because that's going to bend and sort of wander off, and that's not going to look right. Whereas if you've just got rocks and things that don't really, no one's ever seen, they don't know what they look like, then it's not so much of an issue. Other things are you've got to be aware of shadows, because you're so wide that if you've got your tripod or yourself and the sun's behind you, then you'll get shadows in the bottom of your image. Just be careful of that. Today we're okay because the sun's rising over there, and that's creating the shadows behind me, so the shot is perfect. The other thing with your foregrounds is you want to point the camera down, which will then accentuate the foreground interest. So you're pointing it down sort of unnaturally, if you like. You're not pointing it level, you're pointing it sort of down like that, and that'll really bring the foreground into the shot and make it stand out even more. Now, what I'm also doing with this image is we're going to do a focus stack, because this rock is so close to the camera in the foreground. Obviously that's not going to be in focus at any f-stop along with everything else. So we're going to do 3 shots. We'll have one focusing on this very close part of the rock right here. We'll have another shot focusing on this part of the rock just a bit further back. Third shot on this bit of the cliff just here, and then a final shot which will be right on these mountains over here. And I think overall we'll then blend those together, which I'll show you how to do in a minute. That will give everything in focus at f-stop of f8, f9, something like that. No way you'd do it otherwise. Now, when you're trying to incorporate the foreground into your image, the camera height matters an awful lot. You don't always need to get down nice and low. I have here, because if I move the camera up slightly, I start to get the car park at the bottom of the valley in the shot, which I really don't want. I know I could sort of clone it out and edit it out, but I'd rather keep things true to life if I can. So going nice and low has just got that out of the shot for me, so that's why I've gone low. But the one thing you do want to think about is your sort of mid-ground. You want to try and connect, if you can, that foreground interest into the rest of the shot. You don't just want a strong foreground sort of the very front of the shot, very bottom, nothing in the middle, and then a strong background in the back, because it doesn't lead your eye through. You don't, you sort of want to stop at the bottom and then you see the top image, and there's no natural progression. Whereas if you have a nice mid-ground, so here we've got these sort of rock colours and the leading line of that cliff edge that draws your eye through the frame, that works really well. So as you can see, now I've raised that camera up, we sort of lost the flow of that image. It's still a nice shot and I still really like it, but this boulder here is no longer quite as large in the shot, and it no longer sort of fills the frame and draws your eye through. The mid-ground also has a bit more of a gap in it, so you just sort of got a bit lost. Are you meant to be looking at the nice background, or are you meant to be looking at this rock in the foreground, or sort of there's this cliff top in the middle, and it all looks a bit disjointed. Whereas when I had that camera nice and low, if we go back to that shot, then you'll see that everything just flows. You've got that rock, and it joins nicely into the cliff top edge, and then that leads your eye into the really expansive sky in the background, because again we're nice and low, we're not quite shooting quite as, the angle of the camera isn't quite down as much, and that just gives out that sky, makes it look wonderful. So like I was saying, you don't always need to use a wide angle lens, and in fact when the light starts becoming a bit harsh like it is now, the sun has really risen, that can actually help because you can focus more on the intimate landscapes. So what I've done here is switch to a zoom lens, and we're at about 70mm or so, and because the light started to rise, I've really started to look for some contrast in the landscape, and that's exactly what we've got with this rock that's over here. So we've got one side being in the shadow, one side being lit up by the sun, which is still nice, but it's not quite as nice as it was this morning. And then we're using this little ridge here, this very small, well, not a small rock, but this little rock is giving us a nice sort of leading line into a few boulders down further down the scene, and then into that rock, which is sort of the main subject of the image. And then we've got the nice misty, cloudy valley down below, going for a portrait orientation. And we're just going to use these leading lines, draw your eye through the frame, and I think even though we've got a harsh light and this isn't your wide vista, I think that's still going to be quite a nice shot. Now this is another one of those shots where the height really makes all the difference. As you can see here from that shot that we started with, it was quite low and I really did like that. But having moved the camera up slightly, you can now see we start to get a bit more, we zoom out, start to get a bit more of that foreground coming in. We started to join those elements in the scene. We've got this rock at the bottom half, which can still be quite dominant, take up most of the bottom half of the frame. We've then got this mid-ground, which are these boulders, which also sort of blend you in and draw your eye through, leading us up to this rock in the background, which has that fantastic light and that fantastic shadow on it, which is what drew me to the shot in the first place. So I think we'll pop that tripod up a little bit and see what we can do with a higher shot. Equally, don't want to go too high because then they start to become a bit disconnected. Well, actually now I've spent some time setting that up, getting the tripod up nice and high, composing those shots. I'm not really sure how I feel about it. Still like this boulder in the bottom, it's giving us the nice leading line into the subject, but I'm not sure if those boulders in the middle, the mid-ground, really join our subjects together or whether they detract from it. Let me know what you think below. I'm undecided. I like both those images, and I do really like the contrast on that subject rock. That's really nice, and the nice misty valley below. Still a nice shot, really like it, and that's taken at about 50mm, somewhere around that. So as you can see now, I've got the camera up nice and high. I've really had to angle that down to get that foreground in the shot, and that'll really accentuate it, and it also shows you quite nicely down the valley, so that works as well. Got center column up, so I am using the 2-second timer for these shots. Again, it's going to be a focus stack, and I'll jump into Photoshop now to show you how you all stick them together and how you make those 4 images stack into one nice image where everything's perfectly sharp, perfectly in focus. Okay, so here we've got our 3 images within Lightroom. You can see we've got our first one, which is focusing on the foreground, the second one focusing on the midground, and the last one focusing on our subject rock. We're going to select those 3. We've already done our basic edits. Right click on them and go Edit In and select Open as Layers in Photoshop. Once Photoshop opens up, you should see something that looks a bit like this. You have your image there and the 3 layers on the right hand side. Select those 3 layers all at once, go to Edit and select Auto Blend Layers. When that opens up, I generally leave the options as default. The Content AI Fill won't do anything unless you've sort of got gaps in your photos, so leaving that checked really isn't going to make any difference. I always get this random error come up when it's done. It doesn't seem to affect the image or anything, so I just click OK and ignore it. And then there you go, you've now got a perfectly blended image with everything in focus from front to back. Save that. Then when you dive back into Lightroom, you can zoom in and see that everything is now in focus from the foreground, midground, and our subject rock. Easy as that. You can now do your final edit. For me, I'm just going to go with black and white, and away you go. Everything's done. Perfect image. So I think that shot there is a perfect example of where adding the foreground interest can really help elevate a fairly mediocre shot. Obviously that's never going to be an award-winning shot. At the end of the day, it's a rock on the top of a valley, and we've lost the wonderful light, and we haven't got that massive vista that everyone really loves in a landscape shot. But if we'd just taken a photo of that rock on its own, it would just be a photo of a rock leading into a valley. Whereas adding that leading line in the foreground, you know, we've thought about it, we've composed it, it elevated it from a shot that someone would just take on their phone, quickly upload to Instagram. It's become a lot more of an involved shot and something a bit better than it would have otherwise been. This is a bit better planning. Come up to a new peak at sunset, Got a wide angle lens on, looking down over a reservoir from the very top. We're using the foreground again, we're using the edge of the cliff here with an overhang, just giving us a nice interest in the foreground, along with the mountains, that brilliant sunset. Let me spin you around a bit. That brilliant sunset and the cloud detail in the background. It's quite hazy, so we don't know if the sky's going to go orange yet. Hopefully it will. 50-50 chance at the moment. But what a stunning evening. Very windy and cold, but fantastic nonetheless. I paid very close attention to this bit because I don't want this overhanging rock to join up with this mountain here. I want the water to flow all the way through the shot. Sort of lead your eye through into the background, and then that stunning sunset with the clouds up there as well. Hopefully it's going to go orange. Just got to wait around now and see what happens. It's going to be a focus stack. We've got 3 shots, one focusing just on the rocks here, one on the overhang, and then one in the distance to infinity. We'll stack the 3 together, and I think it's going to be a winner. Well, I really hope that's helped you use foreground in your image and integrate them into your next shoot. As you can see, when you've got the good light, it really does take your image to the next level. And when you haven't got the good light, like this morning, and you failed the planning and you're shooting a sunrise and you should have been a sunset location, it helps rescue the shoot and means you can still get some fairly decent images out of it. Hope you've liked it. If you have, give it a quick like so YouTube shows it to more people. Maybe consider subscribing for some other content. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you soon.